Hello everyone, Bob Believers around the world. So in today's video, I'm going to be exposing the dark truth about ChatGPT and comparing it to Google Gemini and how ChatGPT is really a JFETic supremacist AI bot, and it will not change its position based on evidence, but is programmed to defend the JFETic supremacist, or what we would now call white supremacy narrative. Repeat, it will not change its position based on the evidence. It is programmed to protect the false white version of history. All right? And it will not pivot from that no matter what. All right? It doesn't change based on evidence. It is programmed to defend the JFETic lies in history. Now let me explain. So the other day, I was doing some study and discussing the Edomites with the ChatGPT. And the study started off about, I was curious if the ChatGPT had any sources in its database that I could add on to what the Most High Yah has already, graciously provided, exposing the devil doctrines of the One West camps. Because a lot of this stuff is hidden, because the powers that be want us to continue to be stuck in devil doctrine. So you're not going to find all these old ancient books exposing the truth about what Moab, Edom, Ishmael really looked like. You really have to go looking. And since ChatGPT is basically a digital library, I was asking ChatGPT if it had anything of the sort in its database. Since it has access to all these books all across the internet from all these different time periods. And immediately, ChatGPT went on the defense, saying that it had nothing in its database or no points that it could bring up from the Hebrew Israelite perspective. The Hebrew Israelite perspective being that those people in the Middle East today, those Turkish Japhet types, are not the original people of the land. So immediately, ChatGPT went on the defense. I went on the defense as well, and I started providing some sources. For example, the Negro Question, which contains ancient depictions of the Hebrew Edomites being black folks, not what the modern JFETic historians like to call Middle Eastern, which is really just a white man with black hair and a suntan. All right? But that's the fake narrative of history that ChatGPT is defending, which is that these JFETic Turks are the original peoples of the land. All right. And what ChatGPT said in regards to the Negro Question is that the Negro Question is an interpretation. So in other words, ChatGPT does not consider the Negro Question evidence and calls it an interpretation. That was its defense against that truth, against that history, against that evidence. All right. And then I mentioned other things, like the writers describing the Hebrew Edomites as swarthy. Guess what ChatGPT replied? There is no undisputed evidence that the Hebrew Edomites were African people. All right? But I just provided the evidence. Clear as day. Truthful, set in stone evidence. But ChatGPT would not budge. And it started going on a whole bunch of foolishness. So just out of curiosity, I went to the Google Gemini because Elder Cotton, Sons and Daughters of the Covenant Yah, uses Google Gemini for his studies, who you bring it out sometimes in his lessons. I used the ChatGPT historically, but one time I did use the Google Gemini, and I noticed that Google Gemini seems to actually be a neutral library, unlike the ChatGPT. Because the Google Gemini, when I used it in the past, actually changed its position based on the historical evidence. So just out of curiosity, I went to the Google Gemini and started explaining what happened with the ChatGPT. And the Google Gemini absolutely blew my mind. The Google Gemini talked about the bias that is built within ChatGPT, and how ChatGPT won't change because the sources that are programmed into the ChatGPT for it to use are those same JFETic supremacy sources. So when someone comes along saying that Jacob was a black man, it automatically goes on the defense because its programmers put into its programming that Jacob looks like the 1948 people. And no matter how many sources from European sailors or Native American testimony or whatever it may be, they will not change because they have to defend the white lies. ChatGPT has to defend the white lies. And I can't even get into all the stuff that it replied, but it talked about the bias of ChatGPT and what's really going on about that and explaining that. And it also provided some sources. And it explained how the idea of viewing the Middle East through a Caucasian lens of thinking is very new, and how even the ancient Japhet types did not view the Middle East as being their people. And it gave some examples of how the Europeans described the inhabitants of the region where the Bible, most of the Bible took place, where Edom, Moab, Ishmael, Jacob were at, as Swarthy and Tawny. And it then went on to explain how these white supremacist Japhetic peoples, historians today, have tried to redefine Swarthy and Tawny to mean what they call Mediterranean. And it doesn't end there. The Google Gemini, like I said, provided some sources. And it provided an old ancient Egyptian depictions depicting the enemies of Egypt. And these are nations in the Bible like the Philistines, the Amorites and the Hittites, to name a few. And all of those people were swarthy black men. None of them were white. So the Gemini providing an ancient Egyptian source literally just debunked the Esau's the white man doctrine from a whole nother angle. Because we remember, the One West camps try and teach that the Canaanites were albino black people, and that's how Esau got white. But the ancient Egyptians depicted the Canaanites as being super swarthy, like super swarthy. And it also exposed us to Who Was Esau Edom book by Charles A. Wiseman, because he made the claim that he had ancient depictions of the Canaanites that showed them with straight hair and Jewish Tagarmaite noses. But the ancient Egyptians depicted the Canaanites as being flat-nosed, swarthy Africans. No straight hair, black hair, flat noses, and dark skin. So literally both of those devil doctrines and that devil source by Charles A. Wiseman have been shot down. And there's another book that the Gemini provided that exposes this false version of history that makes the Ishmaelites, Edomites, Israelites, Moabites white, with another book that I can't even find right now. And for a second, I thought that this was a slip-up and Google had deleted the response by Gemini, because when I went back to read everything that it said, I couldn't find it. But luckily I did. It even went into the Esau is Rome thing and exposed how that's a lie, and how the Esau is Rome thing was something created by the Jewish Talmudists as an analogy about how the Romans were treating them so badly and how the Romans were their enemy. So they used Esau as an analogy to portray the Romans as their enemy. And it was never a genetic actual descent from Esau thing. You see? That's where the One West camps get that doctrine. It was never actually about genetic real descent. It was an analogy. It's kind of like if you had somebody who bullied you really bad at your preschool, and now you're in high school and there's another bully, and as an analogy, you call your high school bully Tim after the name of the preschool bully. You're not saying they're the same person. It's that they behave and they treat you like them. But you see, the One West camps have twisted all that and created a devil doctrine around it. All right? So I'm definitely going to, all praises to the Most High Yah, of course, because, the Most High Yah has definitely used Google Gemini the other day, to provide me with even more sources. And I'll definitely have to make a lesson with those black swarthy Canaanites, because that just shoots down a lot of Satan's evil ways. All right. Anyways, bye for now.